Hello, welcome back to Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley on YouTube. I'm Pastor Charmley. I'm here to talk about one of the great Christian books in English that has influenced the church more than I think most of us realise. Now, it's a bit unusual because this is a book that, although it has been reprinted recently, it's not one that is constantly in print, but it's incredibly influential nevertheless, and it is the Psalms and Hymns of Isaac Watts. This is a reprint edition. This is an actual old 19th century printing. This printing dates from 1803. Now, Isaac Watts died in 1748. He was born in 1674. He was the son of a nonconformist in Southampton, and he spent most of his early life in the city of Southampton. His father was imprisoned at least twice for nonconformity and had to spend 2 years effectively in exile in London because the local council in Southampton took the view that Isaac Watts Sr. was a subversive figure. That was persecution. And it's amazing to think that until the latter decade, the last decade of the 17th century, it was quite normal in the United Kingdom for, well, the United Kingdom didn't exist then, but in England and in Wales and in Scotland, for Christians to be persecuted for belonging to the wrong church or for worshipping in the wrong way. Isaac Watts' father was a Congregationalist, an independent, one who believed that local churches should be autonomous, which doesn't mean they should be isolationist. It means that, however, there's no sort of upper body that tells us what to do. Congregational independent churches joined together in fellowships and in unions, but really the influence, the power of the union is limited to telling churches, oi, stop what you're doing or you will be removed. Now, Watts was an intelligent lad. His father was middle class, maybe upper middle class, but he went to the local grammar school. He couldn't go to university because university was barred to dissenters, and so he went off to Newington Green Academy in 1690 because, of course, by 1690 the glorious revolution of 1688 had happened, and it was now possible for nonconformists to worship openly. There were still limits to what could be done. You couldn't go to university. There were laws about how you had to do things. You couldn't necessarily have the doors open for people to come in. But nevertheless, the restrictions were just restrictions. It wasn't a ban. There wasn't a ban on worship other than according to the Church of England. And so the academies were open again. And Isaac Watts went off to study at Newington Green. And in London he listened to such surviving Puritans as John Howe and Thomas Googe. But he really belongs to the 18th century Watts, not the 17th. He's not a Puritan. He's a nonconformist, even though he's often listed as a Puritan. His mindset is very 18th century. Watts is much more concerned with reason and rationality than the Puritans were. It's not to say the Puritans were irrational or unreasonable, but it's that the great concern for the Puritans wasn't reason and rationality. Neither it wasn't the great concern, but it was a great concern. And of course, Watts is best known for his hymns. He wrote many other books, but he's best known today as a hymn writer. His hymns are immortal in a sense. Now, he began writing hymns because when he finished his college course, he went back to Southampton for a while, and he did not like the Sternhold and Hopkins psalm versions that were being sung. He felt they were bad poetry. Put it like that. He felt they were bad poetry. But also he had a concern that if you're just singing psalm versions, you're singing Old Testament. And yes, of course, the Christ is in the Psalms, in type and in shadow. But he said, can we not sing about Christ now that he has been revealed? And so his first hymn is based on Revelation chapter 5, verses 6, 8, and then 9 to 12. Behold the glories of the Lamb, amidst his Father's throne. Prepare new honours for his name, and songs before unknown. Let elders worship at his feet, the church adore around, with vials full of odours sweet, and harps of sweeter sound. Those are the prayers of the saints, and these the hymns they raise. Jesus is kind to our complaints, he loves to hear our praise. Eternal Father, who shall look into thy secret will, who but the Son shall take that book and open every seal. He shall fulfill thy great decrees, the Son deserves it well. Lo, in his hand the sovereign keys of heaven and death and hell. Now to the Lamb that once was slain be endless blessings paid. Salvation, glory, joy remain forever on thy head. Thou hast redeemed our souls with blood, hast set the prisoners free, hast made us kings and priests to guard, and we shall reign with thee. The worlds of nature and of grace are put beneath thy power. Then shorten these delaying days and bring the promised hour. And you note that phrase he has here, and songs before unknown. And there is in that a polemic, of course, or an apologetic at least, defending the use of hymns based not only on the Old Testament, not only paraphrases of the Old Testament psalms, and all metrical psalms are in some sense a paraphrase, because Hebrew poetry doesn't work like English poetry, but not just paraphrases of psalms, but paraphrases of New Testament texts, because that is what this hymn is. But he moved on from that to hymns that are based on New Testament doctrine, but are not paraphrases of any text. So the second hymn, ere the blue heavens were stretched abroad, from everlasting was the Word. With God he was, the Word was God, and must divinely be adored. By his own power all things were made, by him supported all things stand. He is the whole creation's head, and angels fly at his command. Ere sin was born or Satan fell, he led the host of morning stars. Thy generation who can tell, or count the number of thy years? But lo, he leaves those heavenly forms. The Word descends and dwells in clay, that he may hold converse with worms, dressed in such feeble flesh as they. Mortals with joy beheld his face, the eternal Father's only Son, how full of truth, how full of grace, when through his eyes the Godhead shone. Archangels leave their blessed abode, to learn new mysteries here and tell the loves of our descending God, the glories of Emmanuel. And there you can pick up, there's some paraphrasing, for example, of the first few verses of John's Gospel, paraphrase from Colossians, but also there's new material that's not directly paraphrased in Scripture, though it's speaking of Scripture. And it's these hymns that are what's great claim to fame. Now, if you're someone who believes that we should only sing the Psalms, Watts is a villain, and there are certain groups who have dedicated themselves to a great extent in vilifying Isaac Watts. It's more complicated than that. I mean, Watts said some strange things sometimes in his attempt, in his rational 18th century way, to be an apologist for the faith. But Watts is not a heretic, though he says some odd things. He says some odd things at times. They seem rather to have been a problem with expressing himself than anything else. He also went back and he paraphrased the Psalms. But he paraphrased the Psalms in quite a radical way, to try to make the Psalms Christian, to speak in Christian terms, using the Psalms, to bring the types and shadows, as it were, into the light of the gospel. So we find, for example, in his version of Psalm 50, and the first part, the Lord the judge before his throne bids the whole earth draw nigh, the nations near the rising sun and near the western sky. No more shall bold blasphemers say, judgment shall ne'er begin. No more abuse his long delay to impudence and sin. Though on a cloud our God shall come, bright flames prepare. Throned on a cloud our God shall come, bright flames prepare his way. Thunder and darkness, fire and storm lead on the dreadful day. Heaven from above his call shall hear, attending angels come, and earth and hell shall know and fear his justice and their doom. But gather all my saints, he cries, that made their peace with God, by their Redeemer's sacrifice, and sealed it with his blood. Their faith and works brought forth to light, shall make the world confess my sentence of reward is right, and heaven adore my grace. And you see at that point that Christ is brought in. But the third part of his Psalm 50 is even more surprising, because it begins, when Christ to judgment shall descend, and saints surround their Lord. He calls the nations to attend and hear his awful word. And here he is explicitly Christian. He's explicitly bringing the fact that Christ is the great judge of living and dead into the Psalms. Some of his psalm versions have become classics. The best known is undoubtedly his version of Psalm 90. Our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, our eternal home. Under the shadow of thy throne thy saints have dwelt secure. Sufficient is thine arm alone, and our defence is sure. Before the hills in order stood, or earth received her frame, from everlasting thou art God, to endless years the same. Thy word commands our flesh to dust. Return, ye sons of men. All nations rose from earth at first, and turned to earth again. That's a verse often left out, of course. 1,000 ages in thy sight are like an evening gone, short as the watch that ends the night before the rising sun. The busy tribes of flesh and blood, with all their lives and cares, are carried downwards by the flood, and lost in following years. Time, like an ever-rolling stream, bears all his sons away. They fly forgotten as a dream, dies at the opening day. Like flowery fields the nations stand, pleased with the morning light. The flowers beneath the mower's hand lie withering ere 'tis night. Our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be thou our God while troubles last, and our eternal home. Now, some of his psalms and hymns that are well known have, of course, been altered by others over the years. His version of Psalm 100, one of his versions of Psalm 100, is very well known, and yet not in the version that he wrote it. Sing to the Lord with joyful voice, let every land his name adore. The British Isles shall send the noise across the ocean to the shore. Nations attend before his throne with solemn fear and sacred joy. Know that the Lord is God alone. He can create and he destroy. And the first verse has been altered by John Wesley, who decided the reference to the British Isles was a little bit too clunky, and so he alters it and it's the altered version that finds its home in our modern hymn books. What's never meant for people to stop singing the Psalms? Now, it's sad that people have, since Watts' day, stopped singing the Psalms very much. But Watts didn't want that, although we have to conclude and confess that his language, that his treatment of the Psalms sometimes lends itself to people saying, well, why should we sing the Psalms? Why shouldn't we sing just New Testament material? Why not both? Some of his psalms and hymns are absolutely immortal. They're found in every hymn book. Some have disappeared. Some have vanished. Some ought not to have. There's an interesting comparison to hymns that stand together. Hymn 66 and 67. Hymn 66. There is a land of pure delight, where saints immortal reign. Infinite day excludes the night, and pleasures banish pain. There everlasting spring abides, and never withering flowers. Death like a narrow sea divides this heavenly land from ours. Sweet fields beyond the swelling flood stand dressed in living green. So to the Jews old Canaan stood, while Jordan rolled between. But timorous mortals start and shrink to cross this narrow sea, and linger, shivering on the brink, and fear to launch away. Or could we make our doubts remove, those gloomy doubts that rise, and see the Canaan that we love with unbeclouded eyes? Could we but climb where Moses stood, and view the landscape o'er, nor Jordan's streams, nor death's cold flood should fright us from the shore. And that's one of the hymns that's found its place in almost every hymn book, which then followed with another glorious hymn that's so often omitted today because of some of the language. Great God, how infinite art thou! What worthless worms are we! Let the whole race of creatures bow, and pay their praise to thee. Thy throne eternal ages stood, ere seas or stars were made. Thou art the ever-living God, were all the nations dead. Nature and time quite naked lie to thine immense survey, from the formation of the sky to the great burning day. Eternity with all its years stands present in thy view. To thee there's nothing old appears. Great God, there's nothing new. Our lives through various scenes are drawn and vexed with trifling cares, while thy eternal thought moves on thine undisturbed affairs. Great God, how infinite art thou! What worthless worms are we! Let the whole race of creatures bow, pay their praise to thee. And you see the contrast, but it's this language of worms that was entirely normal in the 18th century, and yet today we're told, we can't speak of ourselves as worthless worms in comparison to the great God. But it was honest, sincere language then. I'll close with what has to be Watts' best known hymn, and rightly so. The 7th hymn in his 3rd book. When I survey the wondrous cross, on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? His dying crimson like a robe spreads o'er his body on the tree. Then am I dead to all the globe, and all the globe is dead to me. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. And it's there that what really grasps us as we think of his love for Christ and glorying in the cross. And we join him, glorying in the cross of Jesus Christ. Well, may God bless you and help you in reading the best book of all, the Bible, and the best books written by men, the books that help us and encourage us in our Christian walk. May God bless you and keep you, for Christ's sake. Amen.